Imagine two phone calls, same parent, same week. Your son calls on Sunday. It's a short call. He asks if you need anything, tells you the weather's been rough up north, laughs at something the dog did. 10 minutes. You hang up feeling fine, calm. No weight left behind. Then your daughter calls on Tuesday. The conversation lasts an hour. At some point, something shifts. Maybe she brings up a birthday you forgot 3 years ago. Maybe she mentions that you always favored her brother. Maybe she goes quiet in a way that says more than any words could. And when you hang up, you sit with the phone in your hand and think, what just happened? If that scene feels familiar, if you've spent years wondering why your daughter and your son seem to come from two completely different emotional worlds, I want you to know something. You are not failing as a parent, and your daughter is not broken. There are reasons for this. Deep, psychological, very human reasons. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 6 of them. I've spent over 40 years as a clinical psychologist, and I've sat across from hundreds of parents, good parents, loving parents, who were confused and sometimes heartbroken by what felt like an impossible gap between them and their adult daughters. Today, we close some of that gap. Let's start at the beginning. Not with your daughter specifically, but with how she was raised. Not just by you, by all of us, by this culture. From the time girls are very young, they receive a consistent message, sometimes spoken, often unspoken. You are responsible for how people around you feel. A boy who doesn't notice that grandma seems sad gets a pass. A girl who doesn't notice gets a gentle correction. Go check on her. Ask her what's wrong. A boy who forgets to say thank you is forgetful. A girl who forgets to say thank you is rude, maybe even cold. Over decades, this kind of conditioning shapes a woman's nervous system. She becomes, as psychologists call it, the emotional hub of her family network. She tracks everyone's feelings. She anticipates needs. She manages conflict, smooths over tension, makes sure everyone's okay. And here is the cost of that. By the time she's in her 30s or 40s, she is exhausted in ways that are invisible to almost everyone around her, including you. So when she seems distant, when she keeps visits short, when she doesn't call as often as you'd like, before you interpret that as coldness, I want you to ask a different question. Is she cold, or is she running on empty? In 40 years of practice, I have rarely met a distant daughter who didn't care. What I have met, again and again, is a woman who loved deeply and gave too much until she had nothing left to give. Understanding this doesn't fix the relationship overnight, but it changes everything about how you approach it. Reason 2. Daughters hold a different mirror up to you. Here's something I've observed over and over in my clinical work, and it never stops being striking. Sons tend to compartmentalize their relationship with you. They love you in one room of their inner world and close the door when they leave. It's not that they care less, it's that they've learned to hold family and self in separate containers. Daughters tend to integrate. They carry the relationship with them, everywhere. What this means in practice is that your daughter is far more likely to see herself in you and see you in herself. The way you criticized is the voice she hears when she criticizes herself. The way you handled failure is the template she compares her own failures against. The things you said in her childhood didn't just pass through her, they became part of her. And here's where it gets delicate. When a daughter has unresolved pain from the relationship, and most do, because most relationships carry some unresolved pain, that pain doesn't fade the way it tends to fade for sons. It stays active. It surfaces. And sometimes, it surfaces in a conversation that started about something completely different. This is why your daughter might bring up something from 30 years ago that your son has apparently forgotten entirely. He hasn't necessarily forgiven it. He's compartmentalized it. There is a difference. What I want you to hear in this is not guilt. What I want you to hear is opportunity. Your daughter is still working through the relationship with you, which means the relationship is still alive. She hasn't given up. She's still trying to make sense of it. That is not rejection. That is engagement. Reason 3. The role expectation gap. Now I want to talk about something that most parents don't realize they're doing because it's not conscious. It's absorbed. In our culture, even today, even among parents who would describe themselves as fair and equal, there are different invisible expectations for adult sons and adult daughters. Sons are expected to be available when needed. Daughters are expected to be there, emotionally, logistically, relationally, all the time. Sons who call once a week are described as attentive. Daughters who call once a week are described as distant. Sons who skip a holiday get the benefit of the doubt. He must be busy. Daughters who skip a holiday create concern, sometimes hurt feelings, sometimes family conflict. Now ask yourself honestly, do you hold your daughter to a higher standard of relational involvement than your son? Most parents I've worked with, when they sit quietly with that question, answer yes. And here is the profound irony of this pattern. The higher the expectation, the more pressure the daughter feels. The more pressure she feels, the more she needs space. The more space she takes, the more distant she seems, which increases your concern, which increases the pressure, which pushes her further. Your son, carrying less of that invisible weight, often shows up more freely. Not because he loves you more. Because he feels less obligation, and freedom, paradoxically, makes it easier to choose to come toward you. This is one of the most important dynamics I ask parents to examine. Not because it's your fault, but because you have the power to change it. When you release your daughter from the unspoken role you've assigned her, the family connector, the emotional caretaker, the one who's supposed to make sure everyone's okay, something shifts. She can choose to show up. And chosen presence feels different from obligated presence. For both of you. Reason 4. Daughters confront, sons withdraw. Let me give you something that changed the way many of my patients understood their family relationships. When adult children feel pain in their relationship with a parent, they typically respond in one of two ways. They either turn toward the pain, meaning they express it, bring it up, sometimes argue about it. Or they turn away from the pain, meaning they go quiet, become unavailable, and create distance without ever explaining why. Research consistently shows that daughters are more likely to turn toward. Sons are more likely to turn away. What this means for you as a parent is this. Your daughter's conflict, her frustration, her old grievances, her difficult conversations, is often evidence that she has not given up on the relationship. She is still trying to reach you. Even when it doesn't feel that way. Your son's silence, on the other hand, can sometimes mask a deeper disconnection. Not always. But the very absence of conflict should not be misread as absence of pain. I've had patients, men in their 50s and 60s, who told me they hadn't had a difficult conversation with their parents in 20 years. Not because everything was fine. Because they'd decided, somewhere along the way, that the effort wasn't worth it. Their sisters were still arguing, still calling, still bringing things up, still hoping. A daughter who still argues with you is a daughter who still believes something can change. Don't close the door on that. Even when the conversation is hard. Especially when the conversation is hard. Reason 5. Life stage pressures fall differently on daughters. I want to spend a moment talking about the world your adult daughter is living in, because it has a direct impact on what she has available for you. If your daughter is in her 40s or early 50s, she is likely caught in what we call the sandwich generation. She is caring for children, or launching them. She is managing a marriage, or navigating its complications. She is working, often at a demanding career. She is dealing with her own body changing, her own fears about the future. And she is aware, always aware, that she is supposed to be there for you too. Studies consistently show that caregiving responsibilities, both for children and for aging parents, fall disproportionately on women. Your daughter is not just your daughter. She is someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's employee, someone's friend. Every one of those roles makes a claim on her. Your son, statistically, is navigating fewer of those simultaneous demands. Not because his life is simpler, but because the cultural architecture of caregiving has not placed as many invisible burdens on him. So when your daughter seems too busy, or keeps your visits short, or doesn't call back as quickly as you'd like, I want to offer you a different lens. She is not prioritizing others over you. She is surviving a season of life in which everyone she loves needs something from her, and there is simply not enough of her to go around. The most powerful thing you can do in this moment is be a source of ease, not an additional weight. Ask less. Offer more. Be the one relationship in her life that doesn't cost her energy, that actually gives it back. You may be surprised what comes back to you when you do. Reason 6. Your history with her is richer and more complicated. I've saved this one for last because it's the one that requires the most honesty and the most grace. Here is a truth that I've watched transform relationships. The child who challenges you most is almost always the child with whom you have the most history. Think about it. In most families, mothers spend more time with daughters. Fathers have more loaded expectations about daughters. The shaping, the conversations, the corrections, the comparisons, the moments of closeness and moments of rupture happened more often, in more depth, between you and your daughter. More history means more connection, but it also means more moments where something went wrong, more words that landed harder than intended, more patterns that formed without anyone meaning for them to form. Your son's relative ease with you may not be a sign that you did better with him. It may be a sign that there was simply less between you, less friction, yes, but also less intimacy. A daughter who carries pain from your relationship is a daughter who was paying attention, who let you matter, who allowed herself to be shaped by what happened between you. That is not a small thing. In 40 years of sitting with families in pain, I have come to believe that the relationships that cause us the most difficulty are often the ones with the most love underneath. Love that hasn't found its form yet. Love that's been hurt and hasn't healed. The most courageous thing you can do, at any age, is to keep reaching toward that love. Not with demands. Not with guilt. Not with keeping score of who called and who didn't. But with patience. With honesty. With the willingness to say, I know we have a complicated history. I'm not done trying. Let me pull these 6 reasons together, because understanding them is only half the work. The other half is knowing what to do with what you now know. First, resist the comparison trap. Stop measuring your daughter against your son, or your son against your daughter. They are different people with different histories with you, different roles in the family, different ways of processing love and pain. Comparing them almost always produces either guilt or resentment, and neither of those serves you. Second, adjust what you bring to each relationship. With your daughter, the most important thing you can do is lower the emotional temperature. Stop keeping score. Stop referencing old wounds before she does. Be the adult in the room who no longer needs the last word. When she pulls back, don't pursue with pressure. Pursue with genuine curiosity. Ask her how she's doing, and actually listen to the answer. With your son, make contact easier. Don't require depth in order to feel connected. A short call, a text, a shared laugh about something small. These are not crumbs. They are the currency of your relationship with him. Spend them freely. And with yourself, give yourself permission to grieve the relationship you imagined, so you can invest in the one that's actually real. Most of us, as parents, carried a picture of how this stage of life would look. Children close by. Regular visits. Easy warmth. If that picture hasn't materialized, the grief is real. Don't minimize it. But also don't let it become a wall between you and what is possible. The relationship you have with your daughter, however complicated, however painful it's been, is not fixed. People change. Families change. I've watched estrangements of a decade dissolve in a single honest conversation. I've watched cold, distant relationships slowly warm into something neither party expected. It happens. Not always. Not easily. But it happens. And it always begins with understanding. We started this conversation with 2 phone calls. A son who calls for 10 minutes and leaves you feeling calm. A daughter who calls for an hour and leaves you feeling unsettled. I hope now you can hear those 2 calls differently. The calm after your son's call may be the quiet of a relationship that hasn't had to work very hard. The wait after your daughter's call may be the wait of a relationship that is still alive, still asking something of both of you. That asking is not a burden. It is an invitation. Understanding why is the beginning of changing how. And changing how, even slightly, even imperfectly, is the beginning of something better. Thank you for being here. If any of these 6 reasons spoke to something you've been carrying, I hope you'll leave a comment below and tell me which one surprised you the most. Your experience matters, and so does the conversation we can have in this community. If this video helped you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed to Strong Elderly Life yet, this is a good moment to do that. I'll see you in the next one.